to the Masters of Modern podcast, MMcast, hosted by me, Alex Kessler, your host, with my guest and co-host today, Corbin Hosler. How are you?
I am doing well, Alex. Thank you for having me on. We've been recording some fun content before the show, but I guess we can talk about Magic now.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, we do a pre-show for all patrons. We did 22 minutes of content today about the N64 and Sega Genesis, Echo the Dolphin, Star Fox. If you want to hear that, definitely check out our Patreon. And this episode is brought to you by our patrons at patreon.com/theMMcast. Super shout out to all of them. Also, we are affiliated by TCG Player. If you hit that TCG Player link below, it helps us out. When you buy cards, just click that link beforehand. It's appreciated. And also, just if this is your first time listening, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We'll talk a little bit more of that in a second. But Corbin, you're like about to become the MMcast man on the street. You're gonna be doing interviews, reviews, deck lists. We're going to Vegas. Gonna gamble my life away in craps. And today we're gonna talk about what tournament Magic looks like in the future and what's happening there and all of that stuff as well. Welcome.
Yeah, like I said, I'm excited to be on. I'm excited to talk about Magic again, because especially Magic events and Magic coverage, because it's been a minute.
It has. I mean, even with the fact that SCGCon did not have, and we'll talk about deck lists from that in a second, did not have tournament coverage, we have been in a kind of a position where, like, I think the last Magic tournament actual coverage for paper Magic was in Reno. Was Magic Fest Reno?
Phoenix. I don't think we had anything in Reno. I think it was Phoenix.
Yeah. At that point, even then, it was slowing down. So yeah, it's going to be, and it almost didn't happen. So for those who don't know, Corbin reached out to the world last week, kind of saying, hey, Magic Fest Vegas is going to be the first Magic tournament that happens in paper. Outside of SCGCon, but like major Magic Fest-esque event. It's not Magic Fest, it's Magic the Gathering Las Vegas. It's the Gathering. But they're not gonna have tournament coverage. Is anyone out there who wants to help sponsor or make this happen so we can do tournament coverage throughout the event? I reached out and was like, hey, we're gonna say it, the premier modern podcast. At least says it on the business card. We'd love to work with you to make this happen, and what can we do to get coverage back? Because like that's what got us into the game. I got into Modern watching deck lists and live streams and tournament coverage and tournament interviews on SCG and back then the 8 different companies that were doing Modern Grand Prix at the time, and like the fact that we were going to go and have a Magic event and there wasn't going to be deck list coverage out there and interviews and content was going to be sad. So I'm glad we're able to work together and make this happen.
Well, I can't thank you guys enough for stepping up, obviously, because it's huge. Like, it's big in the sense that this is the first Magic tournament we've had in 2 years. Modern's undergone a lot of changes, but yet it's actually pretty fun. And a lot of people maybe don't realize that necessarily. And this is going to be a chance to show it off. And it's just so painful to think about that not only there not being any video, but not even any, sort of the usual text coverage. For those who don't know, I've been doing Magic coverage full time since 2014. My goal has always been to be a little baby BDM and just meet all the up and coming players and do all the tournament write-ups and all this stuff. And it's really what I've like kind of dedicated like a decade of my life to at this point as a career. And everyone talks about, the death of Magic OP and all this stuff, and the moved online events and the pro leagues and blah, blah, blah. And there's so much to talk about all that stuff. But at the end of the day, this is also sort of something that I care deeply about, and it's also how I provide for my family. So, it really meant a lot for you guys to, and not, you guys stepped up into this. There was so much support from everybody saying, this is something we want to happen. What do you need to do so we can send you there to make this happen? And it felt really good to have that valued. So I'm thrilled to be going and doing what I wanted to do ever since I got into Magic, which is just do tournament coverage. So we're going to have some sweet deck lists, I am sure, from that tournament.
Oh yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit on like what the metagame is going to look like in a second. But yeah, I mean, it's super important to us. We're super hyped. We're hyped to be there. We're gonna be on the street, and it's gonna be really cool. For those who want to know where to catch on this, make sure to check out at the MMcast on Twitter. Also, there'll be links below to the sources. We're locking down exactly where like deck lists will be posted and all that content is going to be. But for sure, at the MMcast on Twitter, twitter.com/the MMcast is like the easy place to go to get all that. And yeah, no, like we're in a position with the podcast, like we're promoting Battle Bosses. That's been a big game that we've been launching, and kind of aside with them and the podcast, wanting to make kind of stuff like this happen and really kind of get the word out there. And so we're happy to do it, and are really just excited to see like a high-end Magic tournament happen again, especially focused on Modern. So that's going to be super hype. We'll have a cool deck list for everyone, and we'll probably even do a follow-up podcast once the event's done, kind of going over what happened and what that looked like. And at that point, Ben should be back healthy as well, so it'll be a good return to form. But yeah, so it's going to be really interesting. Like, why don't we talk a little bit of like just like history of tournament coverage, where we're at right now, like what kind of happened, and then what the future could look like, what we want it to look like, and what it maybe looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to when I got involved. I started playing Magic right in 2008, 2009, and I was in college at the time, and I was in college for journalism. So when I looked at tournament coverage, just like you did, and watched everything, I wanted to be a pro and all that stuff, but I also kind of wanted to be the person there covering it, because I had this whole kick about how video games mattered. In the sort of the journalism world, it's sort of the idea that news matters and government matters. Sports, they don't matter, right? And that's what I did before I got into esports like I am now. I just worked in traditional sports, and there was like always kind of that sort of that prejudice, right? And then it's even more so for video games. So I just kind of have been on this crusade to prove that all this stuff matters, because it impacts people, and that always matters. So when we come to Vegas, we're going to have a lot of people in the community who are going to be there, and we want to talk to and show off. In addition to the tournament, it's really going to be just the celebration of the gathering of Magic. It feels a lot like the original Vegas in that sense. So it's sad that there's not coverage, since there was so much coverage before. Over the last 5 years or so, as sort of pro play has gone through twists and turns, coverage has sort of gone alongside that. And we went from a world where we were streaming every Grand Prix across the world in 2017 or 2018. It was 50 shows or something. We all worked a ton. We had a big team. We all loved it. Things went well. And then, I think there's been a focus from Wizards on the casual side of things outside of the tournament side of things, which makes a lot of sense given how popular Commander is and all of that. And you've seen more resources go towards that and less resources go towards people playing Standard, and coverage of Standard or limited Grand Prix is something that is kind of a casualty of that. And it makes sense, but it doesn't really make it any less sad. And with the pandemic, as Luis Scott Vargas said on Twitter talking about this, video coverage has always been kind of a loss leader for events. And in a pandemic, in the world it is now, you're doing these experimental first events back. It's just an expense that I think that was a big ask for a lot of these companies. That's why we're not seeing a ton of coverage of anything outside of Flesh and Blood, which is, sponsoring their own Pro Tour next year. So that's the only place in sort of the tabletop world we're seeing any expansion of tournament coverage. So that's where we're at. I mean, I hope that we get coverage back in the future for Magic. I will say that it's hard to be optimistic given the state of the world and the fact that we have no idea what organized play or pro play. We don't have any idea what any of that looks like right now.
Sure. And like I've talked to a few friends at Wizards, and like from their perspective, some of it is just caution, right? And like even in the world of like toys and stuff, Dallas Toy Fair, which is normally one of the three key selling business facing events every year, happens in early October. Like literally, like we show up September 30th, and then the show is like October 2nd. And it got canceled 2 weeks before it happened. And it was just because like during September, October, stuff was weird, and like the Delta variant was coming back and back. Like, so it's like just doing single events is difficult. We did Gen Con, and Gen Con was public facing. I think the public facing events are the ones coming back first because the people running it are that like the tickets that you are selling are to people that are coming to the event that get to make the decision on their own, versus business facing events like Toy Fair, where the people deciding who's going are adjacent corporations that have their own liabilities. So like Walmart being like, oh, I don't want to force my buyer to go to this event or because if they get sick, I'm liable, is different than, oh, I want to go to Gen Con, I want to go to PAX, I want to go to Dragon Con, I want to go to a Fab event, I want to go to SCGCon, I want to go to Magic Fest or the Gathering, Magic Vegas. I'm gonna do this the whole time. Anytime I say Magic Fest,
it's something.
Modern Fest. The I can make that decision for myself, and those events are liable to make it as safe as possible. And I mean, liable is a strong word, but they're motivated to make it as safe as possible for the people attending and to create an environment that's safe for them with everything that's going on. But public facing things are easier to do right now, and the problem with the pro circuit is it's kind of a hybrid of those two things. Like, yes, like open events like Magic Fests are. The people can show up, but the prize structure of like you then get invited to a physical event that like is more I'm paying you to go, like if you start getting a little bit weird. And Magic Pro Tours, Magic Pro Play is really a 2-year event from like if you're a player who's starting out grinding PPTQs all the way to being at a pro tour, like you have to have like events based out of that PPTQ then feeds into an RPTQ in 6 months that then fed into this system is now 6 years old. Right. Like then that fed into like a Grand Prix circuit that you got pro points for that then would qualify you for an event 6 months from then. So like you could win a event today and the eventual end point of that process is 2 years from then of being on the pro tour and all of those direct tournaments that you would be earning your way on along the way. So like I don't know how you plan that in COVID, because like the alpha whatever comes out of Delta in the Greek alphabet, I didn't take Latin, the epsilon variant could show up, or I get that. I'm assuming that already exists. The gamma variant shows up and makes everyone into the Hulk. And then what do you do? And like, I get where that is coming from. On the other hand, like this is the other thing that happened at Gen Con. Even with them, before Gen Con, they did not think that event was going to be popular. In fact, most of the A-class Fantasy Flight, Ultra Pro didn't have a booth. Wizards didn't have any content there. Like Warhammer was barely there. It was like the adjacent companies that distribute them. Like most of the big supporters of Gen Con did not show up. It was just kind of the mid-tier event people who were like either like us, literally Battle Bosses was there. Like we paid for it already. We can't like eat the money being gone without getting actual use out of it for a 2.5 year period, especially when like next year, who knows what's going to happen. B, we had a game coming out. C, like that tier of like, we kind of have to do this, or we get points from doing it from Gen Con that maybe benefit us in the future. We're not big enough to be able to just like pay our way into that position. Us getting that grandfathered in process helps. And so we did it still. But from Gen Con's perspective, most of their big supporters aren't there. The floor print, like, and this was a mistake that they made. The floor print was about half the size. They pipe and draped off half the hall. They should have spread everyone out. But they're like trying to save money at every corner because they weren't making money. This is a loss leader event for them because it was either make this event happen or Gen Con maybe just doesn't exist anymore. But what ended up happening is it was the most popular event they've thrown, in a long time. It wasn't as popular as maybe the peak of Gen Con, but it tripled what their expectation for the event was, because people want to go to things and like they want to like we're all been cooped up. PAX happened the 2 weekends before, Dragon Con happened 2 weekends before, the Fab event happened the week before that, and all of them were not super spreader events. All of them had strict mask policies that made it so that people were safe. And when people saw those events happen and were like, oh, that was fine, I live in the Midwest, I might as well go to Gen Con. There's tickets available for Sunday or whatever. And at the same time, Gen Con handled it not badly. I will say that they were very good at like everyone wear masks, everyone in the hall. But as soon as you left the hall, like they opened the hall 20 minutes early every day because they didn't have a system built out for there to be people waiting to get in.
Yeah.
And so like
I did not realize it was that crazy there.
Yeah, it was like definitely every day ate in our hotel room. My hands were cracking from hand sanitizer by the end of the show, masks the whole time. But the kind of the point I'm making is that at Gen Con, they spent the bare minimum amount of money at every single opportunity. If something was auxiliary or wasn't something that they thought was a necessary cost, they were cutting it and to the time, but sometimes at detriments, including having lines to make sure people like were getting into the hall orderly and literally cutting half of the hall down because instead of spreading booths out so that it was a little bit more social distant, you like didn't have to pay for the carpeting for half the hall.
Right. Yep.
and which, like, in their defense, that's like a $30,000 expense they saved, but it still like was, choices that were made.
That's where things are at while people are trying to find their foot.
And so when it comes to SCGCon, when it comes to this event, not having coverage, as you said earlier, previously, which was this is a advertising expense for a thing that we don't that we're kind of doing loss leader, partially because we're also sharing that cost with Wizards. Let's not do it yet. Let's see if these events even exist and if they're popular. And like, especially looking at SCGCon, where before Channel Fireball announced that they were doing this event and that it was vaccine mandated, SCGCon wasn't vaccine mandated, and also is Halloween weekend, which has its own weirdness around it. But they like, the vibe about it wasn't super positive. Now it ended up they went to vaccines and it ended up being a relatively successful event even then. But it was definitely something that I can imagine they put their foot in the water to see if they can make it happen. They didn't want to lose that side. They wanted to see what the world was like getting back into it. Events are starting to happen. New York Toy Fair is happening, knock on wood, in February. So like CES is happening. There was a pot convention this week.
And the big news this week is that children can get vaccinated. So I can tell you that for our house, with kids, that is a big deal in terms of what we're willing to travel to. So yeah, I think you're right. Things are coming back. So I think that, when it comes circling back around to Magic coverage, I don't think Magic coverage is dead. And I don't think where we're at now, tells you that. I think that it's going to be a long road back for Wizards organized play, but hopefully before then, we at least see some opportunities from these bigger companies. Now, there are some Magic tournaments out there that are doing video coverage. Shout out to NRG events that they've been streaming. They have a weird, kind of a different remote setup that they've kind of innovated. So there are companies out there in Magic space trying to make it work in this time. But yeah, it's just going to be a long, slow road back, and we don't know what the future looks like. I'm doing it this way, and look, I don't agree, and I don't want crowdfunding of any kind to be the method for which the community gets coverage in the future. That is not how any of this should be. So, with that said, this is a tough time for everybody, and I'm just glad that we're able to step in and make something happen here. So
right. And though I will say, one of the things about Magic coverage that always kind of hamstrung it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, you've on the ground experience, but was the fact that because it's directly coming and some amount of the dollars or some amount of the tournament organization was directly coming either from Wizards of the Coast or organizations that are using these events as advertising for their own product. Star City Games is another example. They're selling their Star City Games brand and their store. But because these things are the ability for sponsorship or interaction of other medium to be a part of these experiences has always been very weird and mostly not allowed, right? Like even to the extent of like an Ultra Pro sponsorship or Ultimate Guard or, stuff that's not necessarily competing with Magic, even that is difficult and problematic. And so it's always been a weird barrier where like I can't strap a Coca-Cola logo or a Red Bull logo onto my playmat and play in coverage. I like have to be within specific frameworks. And so maybe the future is something like this, where there's separate coverage teams that are covering things being sponsored by outside groups that then, like partner with Wizards and partner with Channel Fireball, but then are able to be a little bit more autonomous. Maybe it's more integrated and we go back to the old system. That's always been kind of like an interesting dilemma, is that Magic is a product game. It's not like basketball, where the sport of basketball isn't owned by anyone. So you can slap logos on it.
I mean, it basically has to be your League of Legends model, where it almost just has to be subsidized by the parent company, or the company running the event. Like an analogy would be doing direct work for, say, an Overwatch League team or something like that, a League of Legends franchise. But it's the same thing, where everything sort of flows back through the parent company, because that's just how that's sort of the original sin of the esports world. That's why it'll never be football.
Is that someone owns it?
Somebody always owns whatever's being sold. Yeah. It's it's obviously not really hamstrung the growth of esports or anything, but it's an interesting dilemma. And that's where things like franchising and stuff like that comes in.
And company policy is part of that, right? Like with other franchises, like League of Legends lets other companies sponsor teams, right? You can have some amount of outside sponsorship. Dota can't be one of them, but like there's a lot more of like open sponsorship there. And like Magic has always just not been as allowed to do that for whatever reason. And some of it is audience size has never been large enough where they have been able to garner the bigger ones, but even the smaller ones are stuff that could have gotten there and just has never really gotten all the way across. But the other thing I want to talk about before we get into trivia, because I want to do trivia because that's how this podcast works. Actually, let's do that right now. Let me put thing. All right. So for those who don't know, including Corbin, because he hasn't heard the rules yet, we do a game of trivia, and it's a game of trivia with each other, but also with you, the audience. And the way this works is Corbin, normally I ask our guest or Ben a trivia question, and asking also you, the audience, and you have to comment below your answer. You're making a bet, though. If you get it wrong, you have to hit like and subscribe. You gotta hit both of those buttons. If you're already subscribed, you don't have to hit subscribe, but you definitely have to hit the like button. And then if you get it right, you don't have to do that. We appreciate it if you do it, of course, but you don't have to. You've won. You got one on us. You can subscribe next time when you get it wrong, but make sure to come back.
There's a lot riding on this trivia question now.
There's a lot. All of our subscribers are riding on this trivia question right now. And then all him and Haas will give you a chance to comment below. But today I am being asked the trivia. Corbin is in charge. He is the Quizmaster hat. So come at me. What's your Magic trivia? What you got?
All right, I'm ready. All right. What is the first colorless non-artifact creature to be printed? I can give you more details if you want them. I didn't just pull this out of left field. This is a known card for this reason.
Colorless, so it can't be like it's not that courier that I think that is an artifact anyways. But it's all colors. Yeah, it's not that. I do get a hint.
I can give you a hint. I can give you a set if you'd like.
All right, let me see if I can think of this. Okay, so it's. I want to say it's not an Eldrazi, because if it was an Eldrazi, this would be an easy question, and hard too, because there's 80 of them in one set. So it has to be something that wasn't specific.
You're on the right track.
It feels so and I think it's pre the world of Ugin, so it's not like Ugin's Construct or Ugin's whatever Adept or the Dragon Baby Ugin's child spawn, because Ugin's post Eldrazi. So
right. You are right. You're on the right track. This is it is pre Eldrazi. I'm gonna give you. This might be a giveaway. This card had errata within a week of release.
Oh, so it was printed as not an artifact, but it became an artifact?
Yes.
Oh. It's I know all of its abilities. Oh, now I have to name a card name. So it taps to make an equipment attached to a creature. Right?
Nope, no equipment involved. You tap to put a land card from your hand.
Yeah. You tapped. It's from Zendikar or Worldwake. It's from Zendikar block. Yeah. It taps to do a thing. I'm not gonna know what it's called. It's a construct, right? It is a construct.
It is a construct.
So it's just creature. It's just creature construct, and it was in Worldwake, and we knew Eldrazi was coming, so we thought it was like some cool hint at the Eldrazi. I remember when this happened. So it is an artifact creature, though.
Well, here's the thing, though. Is it? Because at the time, Wizards was really into some guerrilla marketing tactics. And this was the point of history where they really would take cards from future sets and insert them into random booster packs of previous sets so that people would open them randomly in the wild.
Well, famously, like Eye of Ugin and Eldrazi Monument, right, were literally that. Like two cards from these sets did the thing. And so it's very likely that, okay, what's the card name? I don't think we said it.
Walking Atlas.
Walking Atlas. Yep, I know this card. I got there.
Is it an accident that Walking Atlas was a colorless creature right before they printed Eldrazi? I don't think so.
I want to know what chat has to say about it. Now, I do think if I were to put my money on it, I would say that it was meant to be an artifact and it was a printing error because I feel like they would have used the new border. I feel like they would have. I don't know, though.
I mean, they errated it, so it's certainly they said it was a printing error, but we're hard at work.
And it's not like Wizards doesn't
beyond the wooden word here.
Like Wizards makes printing errors, right? Like even the most recent set in Crimson Vow, there's the like vampire that currently just gets +1/+0 forever, but has
and then they certainly had some a number of cards that just go through printing errors.
Yeah. I
mean, look, that's what some might say, but you know what? I want to believe.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give the trivia thing. So yes. So if you did not get it right, you also subscribe, even if you disagree on whether it was colorless ever or not. That's not the way this game works. So subscribe is ours.
Look, if you came up with an Eldrazi, you're technically right. Whatever.
This is
a fun piece of Magic trivia. Is
there because like Ghostfire was like what I was thinking of. I was like trying to think if there was a time spiral. Actually, what I was I disagree. I think it's a morph creature.
Oh.
We're getting this hair pulley. Like a card that was errated within 2 weeks. Like morph creatures existed and were not artifacts.
I just think it's just a fun little piece of trivia that Eldrazi were not, in fact, the first printed colorless creature.
Colorless. Well, and that's why I'm making my morph argument.
That's fair. I guess. Those have a color identity. Ghostfire is an argument.
Like Zoetic Cavern is what I'm thinking.
That is a land.
But it's not an artifact, and it's colorless, and it is a creature at times, and you cast it as a creature.
I know.
You can counter it as a printed creature card.
I'll give you. It's been a minute since I considered Zoetic Cavern. I'll give you that one.
Essence Scatter, legal target for Essence Scatter, colorless. You can target it with Essence Scatter and that counter spell that can counter colorless cards.
Strong point.
That's all I'm saying. All right. So that is the trivia section of today. Now, I do want to get into specifically modern coverage, because I do want to kind of get into a little bit of that conversation, because you talked about limited. You talked about the like standard falling by the wayside as far as Pro Tour coverage, which is a little untrue in the sense that paper standard coverage kind of went away because a lot of that moved towards arena-based tournament play, because at this point, from Wizards' perspective, standard is almost more of an arena format than it is a paper format.
It seems like an arena format. Without getting too deep into the weeds, the standard formats that Wizards has selected to show on coverage over the past year have been perplexing, to say the least. We're getting standard formats in the last 2 weeks of their existence, right before rotation. We're getting standard tournaments right before new sets release. It's not made a lot of sense from a coverage perspective.
Sure.
The formats that have been featured in terms of what we've seen on the arena. which means basically we've seen historic gameplay in dead standard formats for the past 18 months, and that's it.
Well, it's and like it's always been an interesting game plan problem, right? Wizards, the history of Pro Tour coverage has always been a weird debacle because Pro Tours ruin formats. Like Wizards has admitted that Pro Tours were ruined formats, right? Because you're putting the smartest Magic players on the planet, incentivizing them to the greatest possible level to try and make it so that everyone knows exactly what the metagame is of a format. And the fact that modern Pro Tours were canceled for a while because Wizards was worried about how every time they did a modern Pro Tour, it broke the format. Yeah. And standard used to just be like every week it would be like you'd have 3 weeks of standard where no one would know what was good. The Pro Tour would happen and then everyone would know what was good. And then that deck would be the good deck until the next like major event or if something weird happened. Now the like, you know, we've always said mono red is the most successful deck of all time. And if you look at every modern pro or every Magic Pro Tour, it's like just has the most top 8 finishes of any deck archetype, partially because you know what works when you don't know what's good. Murdering someone. It doesn't take that much. It takes effort. It takes a lot of effort, but it doesn't take a lot of effort to figure out that, oh, if I play all of the best red cards and try and kill them as fast as possible, the control deck might not be able to figure out what they need to be doing in time. And like, so that has been a benefit. Like that is one thing, standard metagames, even though they don't always get solved, but that's always been an issue. And then at the same time, it's kind of the most like that's the only interesting time to do it, right? Because your point, a dead format is always going to be really lackluster. I'm not watching it to learn. I'm watching it because I kind of want to see what happens. And how many people want to see what happens to random pros playing Magic Arena, I think is a lot lower than the amount of people that are watching it to learn what they could be doing to play Magic better.
Right. And what's interesting is that, I mean, it makes sense as Commander has driven more sales and that side of Magic has blown up in a way that Wizards can monetize is the important thing. We've always known that casual play drove Magic, but Commander has given them, and you know, things like Secret Lairs and so on, has given them a way to monetize that. And that is why, you know, I fully expect when events come back, we'll have plenty of Magic Fest type events, Command Fest type events. I just don't know how many, you know, modern Pro Tours we're going to see.
Right. Now, I will say this. So I did before the world shut down, I did do the Command Fests, and then I went to that year was the most Magic events I'd ever gone to in my life. Yeah. And
it was a fun year.
It was a good year.
It was going to be the last.
And Command Fests, I think that the model of what Magic Fest Reno is going to be the like successful version of a fest, right? Where the problem with Command Fest is like they were hyper focused on Commander. Mm-hmm. But to the extent that they didn't have mystery boosties, literally mystery boosties launched, or mystery booster packs launched 2 weeks before that at the event that happened. And then in Richmond, and then Magic Command Fest DC didn't have them, but every other Grand Prix did. And it was kind of like, why can't I just draft here? Like, and it's a mistake from the other hand, because like, that's one of the main ways these events make money is selling product in packs or buying product in packs. And there's Command Fest didn't have a good incentive for that, versus the other end of it, where like, even if you just did a big limited tournament, right? Like, and we'll talk about why modern should be the one that all these things are in a second. But even if you just did a big limited event, then anyone can show up. They can play in the 5K limited tournament, and then just have the command zone. The command zone is such a perfect solution to that problem that solves all of your issues. Now I have greater, like we've had whole podcasts about how I think people should be charged to go to command fests in general, like have them be actual festivals. Now, with those come with a bunch of content that is now being able to be paid for, including coverage, including panels, including, you know, what Magic Fest Vegas and Seattle was in that last year, where you have a bunch of content creators, you pay cosplayers, you play artists, you don't have artists protesting events.
That's the best version of a Magic event by far.
And so, but like, I think a tournament being attached to it, a bunch of different versions of events that are available is the best version of it. I think the Command Fest experiment is best as just a maybe make it a bigger focus, make the command zone a real important part of Magic Fests. But I think a Magic Fest model is still what I would recommend. You just are going to get larger audiences, which is the only way to make these successful. Now, why Modern should be the main focus of everything. As
Modern's always been the best format to watch.
And that's where I'm
at. Been the best experience.
So yeah, so I've said this a lot, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on Modern coverage, viewership, watching experience, why it's the best or why it's not the best.
I can tell you that I have this is probably the best way to sum up how people feel about Modern from a coverage perspective. Is I have friends who haven't looked at new standard cards in literal years, like 3, 4, 5 years. But these guys still have their Modern decks from 5, 6 years ago built. And they'll still ask me occasionally what's good in Modern right now. Modern has always captured people's attention because it is so diverse. The strategies are so different. And a lot of it is because people felt like they could build their deck and pick their deck and play it forever. And I don't even know what that looks like after the pandemic. But from a coverage perspective, people always wanted to root for their deck to do well because people really identify with whatever they most like to play. And that's why Modern has always been so popular with groups of with Magic players, while it's not necessarily been that popular at the top level of the pro community, because like you said, they would come together 2 weeks before a pro tour, they figured out how to break the format, they break the format, and then they move on. And they felt like, the complaint from the pros in Modern for a long time was that linear matchups, and you had to choose your sideboard cards, and if you just didn't have the sideboard cards for a particular matchup, you'd auto lose to it, blah, blah, blah. And I think Modern's come a long way since then, so that's not as much same complaint. But even while pros were not on Modern, the community has always had Modern as the highest viewed event, the most interest online. It's just always been the most popular one. So look, if you ask me, that's why I was shocked that there was no video coverage of this, because it's Modern.
Right. It's the one format to do that for.
What people care about. Yeah. Well, it doesn't get bigger than.
And like, to answer the kind of the pro concern, the times I've asked this question to Magic pros, their favorite standard format of all time is the Cobblade standard. And it's because every deck was Cobblade, and it was a chess match between two players being very, very good at knowing who's going to be better at playing Cobblade. Yeah. And the more like the better the pro, or the better the experience for a pro player, the worse the experience for viewership. Almost like it's a directly uncorrelated graph, because pros don't want format diversity. They want every deck they play against to be a matchup that they know in and out. Therefore, their skill level, which is higher than most other people, or they think it is at least, to take advantage of the matchup in the best way possible, versus random people playing in a tournament or watching a tournament where I don't want to see the same deck every format. In fact, a Modern tournament where I'm only seeing the same deck is the one that I start talking about banning cards.
And that's why, and that's also one of the reasons I think that interest in Modern coverage has always been high, because the pros would kind of come along and play whatever deck is the most broken deck or whatever. But someone out there is still playing their Affinity deck or their Blood Moon deck. And, just think about the history of Modern. I've been fortunate enough to be there for some of what I think are some of the coolest moments in the format's history. GP Charlotte, I was walking up and down the tables on day 2. This is before we had electronic deck lists or anything like that. There's no way to look. Just walking up and down the tables. And I came back to the person I was working with, and I was like, I just saw a Codex Shredder on table 14. And that was the event that Zac top 64'd with Lantern. I was the one who broke that deck. I mean, this is the exact kind of coverage we'll be doing in Vegas. I found Zac. We did a deck tech. I broke that deck to the world. Lantern Control wins GP Oklahoma City 6 months later, and Zac is Zac Elsic, and that's something that came as a result of just having somebody there on the floor doing coverage.
After you're able to find that deck, we literally had him on the podcast. I think it was top 16 even, and he was like, "This is the best deck in the format." I was like, "Oh, what's your bad matchup for this deck?" And I was like, "There isn't one." And we're like, "Okay, okay, buddy." You're playing Codex Shredder. There can't be no bad matchup. And then literally 3 weeks later, he wins the GP with it. I'm like, well, I guess
that's what's so cool about Modern is that the point is the pros are going to come in and play whatever that they're going to play Amulet Titan. They're going to just play whatever the most broken, powerful deck is. But someone out there is still playing their brew, and that Lantern control moment was a cool one. The first time Scred Red ever top 8'd a GP. So many people tuned in. Let's just see if Scred Red could beat all these Jund decks that were top of the field or whatever was popular at the time, right?
Yeah.
In Modern, because of the way Modern's historically worked with people identifying with deck archetypes and sticking with decks for long periods of time, it's created an interesting, that's why I think it's always had so much interest. It just has a lot of good dynamics going for it on the player side and the game side.
Well, no, I mean, we were talking about this with the professor a few weeks ago when we had him on, and like Modern, and we've done for the last 4 weeks, we've done like a series of like how to get into Modern, or like a beginner's guide, or like easy ways to buy into it. And, kind of the point was like, and the greater overall philosophy is, it is better to be great at your niche deck than it is to be playing the best deck in the metagame. And if you look at the history of Modern Grand Prix, top 8s prove this all the way through. The amount of like random weird decks that do well are not like the amount of times Merfolk has won a Grand Prix. I mean, we brought this up with the prof, right? Like, he's not going to shut up about it. You're also on this train. And like, it's not because Merfolk is ever like, oh, it's well positioned in the metagame. It's no, Merfolk players know how to play their decks better than everyone else. And like, it's very easy when you're very good at your deck to know how to beat the best deck, because that's like, oh, I can play 10 games against the one deck I need to be good against. That's new. I've learned it. Great. And then, but they don't know how to play against Merfolk, because they like like if there's like 5 best decks, I'm testing against those. And like, I think the amount of I remember this very distinctly. Andrew Brown, who also now works at Wizards, walked up to me at Grand Prix LA, and I was playing this like Tezzeret build, and it was not very good. But a friend of mine was playing Merfolk. I was like, oh, what's his face playing Merfolk? And like, he's like super hyped. You think he's like well positioned. Andrew Brown was like, oh, no way, that deck's trash. Not going to win. No way. And then it won. It won the whole event. And it's like, I told you so. But like, also I
think you summed it up when you say that it's more important in Modern to be good at your deck than to play the best deck. I think that's a one sentence summary of why Modern is the most popular form.
Right. And I think from a viewership perspective, there's also a little bit of a level of like, oh, I know what these cards are. I think like a limitation I always run when I walk into a standard tournament is, unless I'm in a mode where I'm just like playing limited or paying attention to standard, a lot of the times it's a bunch of cards that like, oh, I guess I remember that 2 mana 1/1 that becomes a 4/1 when you pay life. Maybe. Or like, oh, that draft comment is actually good. Like, there's like a bunch of cards, or it's like, oh, it's Ramanut Ruins again. We've played against the same red deck. Like, I remember, and we mentioned this last week too, but I remember doing the coverage for, it was a Twitch Rivals event when Wizards was doing those. And it was like right after, it was like Ixalan, but it was after whatever the core set at the end of Ixalan block was. And so like a 3-mana Sorin that lets you cheat in a vampire was like a thing. So like black white vampires was a deck. Field of the Dead was the other main deck. And at the beginning of the tournament, it's like, ooh, cool. Like, every deck's different. And then by the end of the day, it was my 17th match with black-white vampires versus black-white vampires. And you eventually run out of things to say that are interesting about that matchup. So it's versus Modern, where like, even if you have a format where 50% of the metagame is the same deck, which has like happened in Eldrazi, Winter, and Hogak, like you're still running into cool decks. You're still seeing stuff that's really exciting, and people recognize the cards. No, like, you can have stopped playing Magic for the last 3 years, watch a Modern Grand Prix and be like, oh, Counterspell's being played. I mean, that's new, but in
fact, that would probably be pretty exciting.
Like, oh, Counterspell's still good. I would have figured that card, like the amount of times I'm like, oh yeah, Thoughtseize is still like the best discard spell of all time. And they're like, oh, I owned those, like 4 of those. I'm like, they're great. They're like $30 right now. They haven't gone down as many times as they've tried reprinting them into the ground. So yeah, I think just like Modern has this timelessness is almost kind of the way I want to say it when it comes to viewership as well, where
it certainly did,
sure,
in the pre-Euro days, right? I think we're in a good spot again, but Modern Horizons 2 has we're sort of like in a new look. If Modern's always gone through very drastic, not drastic, but it's gone through different eras. And when people talk about the golden age of Modern, which is like something people used to, everyone thinks that time, and then they think of a different time. Right. And I think that this Modern is different and new, but you know what? It's pretty fun. And this is Modern, and it still features a lot of the same cards, just with some different shells.
Yeah, we talked about that, right? Like if you were a Splinter Twin player, a lot of the expensive cards you had back in the day are still good in that deck. It's now you need to have also gotten Murktide Regents and Ragavans, but like your blue-red mana base, your Snapcaster Mages, etc., are still like a thing that's worth playing. If you've been on the blue-white control train, there are times where that deck has been bad. Now is not one of those times. It's great. And so there's always like even Affinity, where there's like budget Affinity lists that were doing well. There's Affinity list that 5-0'd a few weeks ago, a Modern Daily. Like there's all these lists out there. Like and to the point there, like Merfolk has never been talked about as if it was positioned well, but it randomly will win a GP. And like that's still true in the format. So I don't think we've ran away from it. That does, unless we have anything else we want to say about Modern coverage, it does curtail pretty neatly into the last thing I wanted to talk about on this episode before we just start hyping up Magic Fest Vegas or Magic the Gathering Las Vegas, is we have had a paper Magic Modern tournament. In fact, we had 2 at SCGCon, and I think the results are really fascinating and kind of talks towards this, because there was an invitational, which was all pro players who just have access to every card they could ever want and just picked what they thought were the best decks or the best players. And then there was a Mythic Championship qualifier. So that's an open event. Anyone can join. All the players are playing their key decks. And the top 8s of these 2 tournaments, and I'm going to screenshot both of these and send them to Rick, our editor, and Marshall so that they can put them up here, are drastically different. And like if you look at the Invitational, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different companion decks. And Jeskai midrange, and as like which is a Ragavan Murktide Regent deck, right? And then, but then if you look at the championship qualifier, you have Orzhov Hammer Lurrus, Jeskai Control, Burn, Dimir Mill, Jeskai Midrange, Infect, 4-color Blink Yorion, and 4-color Creativity, which is it cheats. This one's even more interesting. The old ones were cheating Emrakul in the play, but this one is playing Indomitable Creativity, which is X red sorcery, destroy X target artifacts or creatures for each permanent destroyed this way. Its controller reveals cards on the top of his or her library until an artifact or creature card is revealed and exiles that card. Those players put the exiled cards onto the battlefield and shuffle their library, and then it plays stuff like Sunset Revelry and Hard Evidence and just like different cards that let you create creature tokens, and then uses that card to sacrifice it to get Primeval Titan in play. That's like kind of the big new tech. Previously it was like Emrakuls that they were trying to do, and this one seems to be less of a glass cannon and more just like a decent control deck that's playing Teferi Time Ravelers, Wrenn and 6s, a bunch of good removal and card draw spells, Indomitable Creativity, and then Primeval Titan just kills them with Valakut. And it's like a Indomitable Valakut Dwarven Mind deck.
It's got Dwarven Mind. What more could you need?
This deck is so sweet. I love this deck a lot.
It takes a lot to get me to play. I used to say this when I did Mining Modern. It takes a lot to get me to play a Primeval Titan deck in Modern, because I'm just so tired of Primeval Titan. I've just been playing as Primeval Titan since it was in Standard. I'm just over Primeval Titan. That said, this is a pretty cool way to play Primeval Titan.
Oh yeah, I mean, like there's a Time Warp featured like Yorion Blink deck. There's like Mill won the event. So like, and this is kind of the point I'm making. The Invitational is a 100% pro event. So, but it looks like it's the premier event of these 2 events. So when you look at that list, it looks like, oh, Modern's broken right now. Like that format presented looks heinous. like
it looks pretty bad.
Just like Grixis Death Shadow with Lurrus, Orzhov Hammer Lurrus, Azorius Control Kihira, Jund Midrange Lurrus, Jeskai Midrange, Grixis Midrange Lurrus, and Azorius Control Kihira. That's 1, 2, 3 different Kihira decks, control decks, and 1, 2, 3, 4 Lurrus decks. That sucks. But that's partially because every single person in that event is a pro player who has 100% access to whatever cards they want, not totally true. That's a grandiose statement, but like a significantly large. Yeah. Like if you're invited to a tournament, if you don't have the cards you need, you can borrow them from friends, and the few cards you need to have the best possible deck is what you're going for. And often this isn't their format of choice. So they're looking at what's the metagame. If I do a bunch of testing, what deck should I be playing, and what can I just...
Brad Nelson's just going to play Jund, so...
Yeah,
that one's straightforward,
and now he gets to play with Luris. It is how unboomery.
Never mind how many times Brett has sworn off Jund to me. He said, "I'll never play it again." Here he is, top 8ing with Jund. Yeah,
well, because it's good again. It's you say I'm never going to play Jund again when you have the tournament where, because you're playing the 55% against the field deck, you lost that you had the 45% experience. But now Jund is good, so play Jund. But there was like the quantity of players that were in that tournament that were like, I have my thing that's different than what everyone else is. I know how to play this deck. I'm better on it, is going to be a lot lower. And versus the Mythic Championship qualifier or the open event at Magic the Gathering Las Vegas, like you're just going to run into the much larger library of a bunch of different people playing a bunch of different decks and have a much higher chance of doing well. Yes, Orzhov, Hammer, Luris did really well. And honestly, in that type of event, if you're wanting to win it, I would recommend going with something with a more proactive game plan like Hammer Time. But Jeskai Control, Burn, Dimir Mill, like it's a much wider, like Infect did well in this event.
This is just a sweet top 8.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is just a classic modern top 8. That's just full of exactly what we've spent the episode talking about. Dimir Mill. I mean, that's been coming back, but like, don't know if I'm going to call Mill for a top 8. Same with Infect, right? Like these are it's just a nice classic modern event.
Yeah, and
come on.
And you have a few of the like insane plays of just but even the Jeskai Control list isn't a Kira version of it. Is it? Oh, no, it is. It's a Kihira version, but it's playing Solitudes, which I think is that makes sense. This is all relatively what you would expect. But let me go back. But even it was the mid-range list that I clicked on earlier. That was like interesting. Even like the mid-range list is like Seasoned Pyromancers, Esper Sentinels. Like they're all doing really cool things in ways that are different. And it's not. I'm really excited for this event. I think like going into it. Like, even if you look at the MTG Goldfish list, like there's the standard stuff that's out there, and you're going to run into it. But availability is going to come up way more often at this event.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot fewer Ragavans in that room than there are in the Star City Invitational.
Right, and on top of that, like that means the decks that are currently on like MTG Goldfish because they're 5-0ing dailies are not going to be as successful because they're specifically tuned to do well against Ragavans and Murktide regions.
True.
Like if like, oh, I have my Murktide region and Ragavan matchup down strat, and then like random person shows up with Infect.
Yeah. I mean, look, the reality is it's probably no more than like 15% for any given deck at the event, right? Max. I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that, but it feels like people just have no clue what to play right now outside of a bunch of Ragavans. So you'll play 9 different decks on day one.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? It's
well, and like there are going to be a ton of Zac Elsics at this event. Like of the person who has been working on their list, like is pissed that they're like the Orzhov Reanimator deck maybe like it wasn't getting enough love and has been mastering it, or even like old Affinity player that are like, no, Thought Monitor is dope. You're all wrong.
The new Affinity lists are kind of cool. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh yeah, they're all really dope. Or like Food could make a comeback, right? Like there's such a wide range of possible options here, and we haven't had a paper event. Paper Magic is different than online Magic and is different than pro level play Magic, and do I think obviously the Invitational is something to point to? There's a reason those pro players are playing it. Like Luris based Jund and Grixis Control are probably amazing decks that you could do very well with the tournament with, and in the long run could become a problem. Yes. Do I think at this event that's going to be the deck that I'd be keeping an eye out for to win the thing? I don't think so. I think like you're going to run into a lot of really cool stuff, and I'm excited for us to share it with the world.
That's right.
Specifically. So like, definitely, if you're excited to see what's going on, I'm really hyped to watch it. Make sure to follow us, follow Corbin, follow me, at the MMcast, at Kess Wiley, and at Hosler, just straight up, right? You got rid of the 88.
We ran a Twitter campaign. A very kind soul gave me the Twitter handle. It was a very nice story.
One of my favorite moments of the internet was when that guy responded being like, "Oh yeah, here."
Yeah, I think it was, I don't remember exactly. I think it was a decade or more. His last tweet was about how he was going to lunch. We got him to come back a decade later to give me the Twitter handle. Amazing internet story.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so I guess last kind of piece is what should people expect? What kind of content are you planning on doing at the event at this point? And obviously this could change and can grow into more content as the next 3 weeks happen. But what should people be expecting?
Yeah, well, I mean, kind of like we've talked about, right? I want, first and foremost, to share the coolest modern deck lists from the tournament, but not just dumping lists. Like, if I was doing official coverage, I have lots of other, this is something going to be one of the cool parts of this, is that I'm a little less tied down. I don't have all these back end responsibilities to eat up my time. So if I see something cool, we're going straight to that player. We're getting a deck tech. We're getting a list. We're sharing it. We're going to have interviews throughout the weekend. This is the big get together. This is the biggest get together Magic in at least 2 years. So this is not just a modern tournament. A lot of content creators, everyone's going to be there. So we're going to make sure to showcase some voices there. But deck lists, deck techs on the Twitter, you're going to have the latest news coming from modern. I mean, we're going to be breaking some of the cool events that I can only hope live up to some of those stories we talked about before.
Oh yeah, and it's like this is the first big hurrah really that's focused on this kind of level. So it's going to be really, really hype. I'm super excited, and excited that we can help you make all of this happen. That's really the best part.
Yeah, this is going to be it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's very nice. Like I said there at the beginning, it's very validating to be doing this and to be doing it with you all this way, and I'm very excited to see what we're going to produce. So I'm glad for Modern to come back. I started doing Mining Modern forever ago, and I've gotten new jobs that have kind of caused me to have to, stop making some of that content. But man, I love Modern. I'm excited to see it back.
Yeah, same. Super, super hyped for Paper Magic in general to be back, and especially Modern. So if people want to find Corbin, there is a link below to find him. All the things that we mentioned before, there are links to as well. And just small, upkeep. I guess this is the end step part of the turn. I came up with a game. It's called Battle Bosses. You can collect these really cool figures. They're one of the reasons we're able to afford and help Corbin make all this happen this weekend. They're a partial sponsor of this podcast, which is helping partially sponsor this event coverage situation. You get different bosses. You get the battle bone play. If you like Magic, it plays like that. It's kind of like a combination of Magic and like action figures fighting each other. There's a link below to that, battlebosses.com. We just re-updated the website, so you can buy them now. They're available to buy, which is really dope. And we'll have content for that. And I will have at Vegas, I'm going to bring a whole set. So I'll be jamming games of that alongside all the other stuff from Commander to Artisan Commander, which is a whole new format that I've accidentally invented in the last 3 weeks, that like now the Discord has 300 people in it, and I have to deal with that problem, and just doing all that kind of stuff. Next week we'll have Nikachu on, so I'm just trying to hit up all of the main Merfolk fans in the world.
The best Merfolk. Look, I don't think anyone's ever put together the Merfolk lineup you've had over the past month.
That's really the goal here.
Between the professor and us.
That's like going into this whole thing. People are like, oh, Merfolk's bad. I was like, no, I'm gonna get the three.
I just saying, I got top 1,000 in Mythic last month with Historic Merfolk. Just saying.
I have no arguments from me. I have it sleeved up right there on that desk. So definitely make sure to listen next week, and then throughout that week on our YouTube channel, there's going to be content. On Twitter, there's going to be content. So make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're super hyped and super glad to have Corbin helping out, and we'll see you next week.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.